The weather outside is miserable. It's gonna rain all weekend, so I guess it's a perfect time to stay indoors and curl up with a good book. And I just happen to have a book all about mythological creatures in Sweden. What do you say? Should we have a look? All people, in all countries, in all times, have told stories about mythological beings. Sometimes these beings are nightmarish creatures used to scare children into behaving properly. Sometimes people invent supernatural entities to help explain certain aspects of the world. And sometimes people just make stuff up because they're bored. This book covers dozens of different beings from Sweden and the Nordics. I'm not gonna be able to talk about all of them, but I'm gonna tell you about the most interesting ones. Gather up close and grab a nice cup of tea and a cinnamon bun, cause now we're gonna transport ourselves back in time, back to the harsh life of a Swedish peasant hundreds of years ago. Or maybe even thousands of years ago, cause some of these beings date back to the Viking Age and even further back than that. And speaking about the Viking Age, let's start by talking about the fierce Lindorm, a dragon-like creature that you might have heard about. At least one particular Lindorm. Dragons didn't always have wings and breathe fire in Sweden. In Old Norse tales, they could also be more snake-like. Lindorm or Lindworm were huge snake dragons that roamed the forests. They could be either good or evil, and it could be either great fortune to meet a Lindorm, or it could lead to certain death. The name Lindorm comes from the belief that these dragon-like snakes spent the winters in little-leaf linden trees. Of course, these days we know that that's not true. These days we know that they spend their winters underwater instead, growing huge and terrifying, unseen to the world. Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent, is an example of such a Lindorm. I don't think that the Midgard serpent could have hidden inside a tree. Unless that tree was Yggdrasil, of course, the world tree. But then again, Yggdrasil is a giant ash tree and not a linden. Either way, another fascinating thing about the Lindorm is that it was believed that whatever the Lindorm lay on would grow in size as the Lindorm grew. This is actually the reason why dragons typically rest on top of huge piles of treasure. They lie on their hoard in order for it to grow bigger as they themselves grow in size. The Swedish word for Santa Claus is jultomten, and the word tomte actually comes from another mythological being that looks a little bit like Santa Claus. Almost. Hustomte or gårdstomte or just tomte in general was the name for a small creature that lived on farms and basically looked like a grey garden gnome. He was small, wore grey clothes, had a white beard and a grey pointed cap. Take the image of a garden gnome, remove the smile, and desaturate the image. Then you basically have the image of a tomte. The tomte was a kind spirit that helped people on the farm. His magic ensured that the farm was prosperous, and he tended animals as well as farmland. In return, the farmer would put out a bowl of rice porridge for the tomte as thanks for his hard work. As I mentioned, the Swedish word for Santa Claus is jultomten, and the legend of the tomte has been mixed with Santa Claus in strange ways. One example of that is this rice porridge. People in Sweden traditionally eat rice porridge on Christmas morning, and that tradition comes from these old legends of the tomte. In fact, rice porridge is often called tomtegröt as well. But the tomte wasn't always nice. If you did something to anger him, like mistreat your animals or your land, or if you forgot to give him porridge, then you're in for a shock. You could wake up one morning and, for example, find that someone had slaughtered your best horse with an axe. The wrath of the tomte was nothing to be trifled with. Instead of angry little grey men, let's talk about murderous nude men playing the fiddle. And no, I'm not talking about myself on Midsummer. Ancient legends from Sweden and Norway talk about a mysterious being that can be found in rivers and streams. If you're wandering through the woods close to a stream, you can sometimes hear a beautiful melody being played on a fiddle. That would make you curious, of course, so you get closer to the sound, and suddenly you see a naked man sitting in the middle of a stream playing a gorgeous and tempting tune. He's trying to get you closer to the water, closer so you can drown. That man is Näcken, a Swedish word that basically means the nude one. But that's just a modern meaning of the word. Näcken got its name from an old Germanic word that has to do with water and bathing. And the oldest version of Näcken didn't even used to be nude. The story of Näcken changed over time, and eventually he turned into the creature we all marvel at and fear today. There are striking similarities between the stories of Ncken and, for example, the tales of Jenny Greenteeth in England or the sirens in ancient Greece. People have always been fascinated with water after all, and they have always feared its tempting but deadly allure. There are more things lurking in the woods than naked men playing the fiddle. There's also naked women roaming the forests. Skooks Ro, also known as the Huldra, is a shapeshifter that lives in the woods. She looks after the forest and the animals of the forest, and she also has a keen eye for men who get lost in the woods. A lost wanderer walking through the forest might suddenly encounter a girl among the trees. She'll turn out to be really friendly and flirty, and before you know it, you'll find yourself seduced by her charming ways. However, you might notice that she only wants to show her front to you and not her back. Kinda like a vlogger, I guess. That's because her back is hollow and her skin has the texture of bark, like an old tree. In some regions of Sweden she has a cow's tail instead, or a fox's tail, but in all cases she wants to avoid showing you her back. Now the Skooks Ro might not actually kill you, but she will try to seduce you, and if you sleep with her, she'll take your soul. Also kinda like a vlogger, I guess. If you sleep with a Skooks Ro, you'll become laconic and introverted, which is pretty much how people in Sweden are all the time anyway, so it might be a bit difficult to tell who has been sleeping with a Skooks Ro and who hasn't. Let's stick with mythological women who do questionable things to people. The English word nightmare has nothing to do with a female horse. Instead, the word mare comes from an old English word that's, also mare, but it has a different meaning. A mare was a demon or a goblin that tormented people when they were sleeping, and that gave them, nightmares. Sweden has a similar word, nattmara, or the more common term, mardröm. They both have the same etymology, with mara being the Swedish word for the being that disturbs people's rest. But in Sweden, this wasn't a demon or a goblin. This was typically a woman instead. The mara would come to you at night and ride you so that you wouldn't get any rest at all. An even older term for nightmare in Swedish is marrit, a mare ride. There's a lot of legends connected with the mara, how they were created, for example. Envious people could turn into a mara, and if a cat jumped over a child that wasn't baptized, that would somehow make the child into a mara as well. These people would turn into a mara while asleep, and then they'd go torment people all throughout the night. But you could get rid of a mara. If you picked a branch from a tree in the forest and took that branch with you into bed, then the mara would ride that tree instead. The tree would become gnarly and misshapen, but at least it would mean that you can get a good night's sleep. Now let's talk about one of the most famous mythological beings from Sweden. What's one thing that everyone associates with Scandinavia? No, I'm not talking about ABBA or the Swedish chef. I'm talking about trolls. Trolls used to be very common in both Sweden and Norway, and Iceland as well. They were sometimes called giants, or mountain beings, or even evil spirits. However, they were all driven away by the coming of Christianity, so you can no longer see wild trolls roaming the forests or the mountains. Trolls varied a lot in appearance and size. Some were small, human-sized, and some were enormous, huge like mountains. They were incredibly strong, and they could use magic as well, so they were beings you should fear. Sometimes they stole children and exchanged them for troll children, because they loved how beautiful the human children looked compared to their own. These children are called bortbytingar, changelings. However, changelings in English mythology were often left by elves instead. Elves are a completely different topic though, let's stick to trolls for now. Trolls were often mentioned in Old Norse tales, and Thor was famous for fighting both giants and trolls, which are pretty much interchangeable. The trolls feared Thor's hammer Mjolnir, and they also feared the sound of church bells, which is another reason that the trolls disappeared when Christianity came to Sweden. John Bauer was an artist who basically defined the modern troll look. His illustrations from the beginning of the 1900s are famous all over Sweden, and this is a book with troll tales and John Bauer paintings. If you're interested in trolls, John Bauer is an excellent place to start, but just remember that trolls were around for hundreds or thousands of years before these paintings, so this is just the latest modern view of how trolls looked. This was a very quick look into some mythological beings from Sweden. I've just covered the barest minimum when it comes to these fascinating tales. I hope that it gave you an interesting overview at least. If you wanna know more about any of these beings, please feel free to let me know in the comments. And if you wanna know more about Swedish myths and legends, also please feel free to let me know. I'd love some feedback on whether or not this is a topic I should dive more into. You can also tell me what you think in the 3-Star Vagabond Facebook group. Join us, it's gonna be fun! Unless you don't want to, I guess. But for now, like and subscribe, but most importantly, have a great day. Oh, and also have a look at this video for even more fascinating or strange facts about Sweden.